Greetings everyone, my name is Anna. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are going to be talking about the worst books that I read in 2019. Now to me I had quite a subpar reading year, so it was kind of trying to pick out books that I really didn't like. I would say that there weren't a whole load of that because like I said, for the most part they were quite subpar. But here are the books that weren't really my jam. Kicking it off, we have Bitter Blue by Kristen Cashore. This is the third book in the Graceling trilogy. It's an oldie. I think it came out in like 2012 or 2013, you know, during that like YA golden era. And so essentially in the book you have people who have braces. So one of your eyes, well, I think both of your eyes, obviously both of them, they're mismatched, and if you have different coloured eyes then it means you have a grace. So you can have a grace that's quite useful. In Katz's case I think she's able to, like, her grace is like fighting. She's like really good at assassinating and killing people. And you can have the most useless of graces, like being able to look into the sun, I don't know. And so essentially in the book, Katz's uncle is using her powers for wrong, and the book is really essentially about her taking back her power and trying to defeat a kind of a big bad in the book. I think I actually gave Graceling 5 stars. It was a very fun read. I ship Katza and Poe. I really wish we got more of them because in the trilogy it's not really a linear kind of plot. So it takes place in the same world. We do see a lot of the same characters, but it's all kind of different storylines. So it's a very fractured story. If you do like certain characters in the books, you're not going to follow them later on, which is a big downside for the trilogy. I think if you do read it, you can read certain books on their own, but the emergence of certain characters won't make sense. For me personally, I would just say read Graceling and be done with it, but that's just me. The beef I had with Bitter Blue was that there wasn't really much progression in terms of certain characters, because for the most part we're trying to go back and find out certain things that a certain character did and put back or put to rights the wrongdoings that they did. What was really frustrating was that Bitter Blue is the queen of her kingdom. A lot of people, they just were lying to her all of the time. They treated her like a child, even though she was like 18 in the book. They hid a lot of information from her. So it's really, rather than there being a mystery, an underlying mystery in the book, it's really Bitter Blue coming up against people hiding information from her. And so I think in theory it probably sounds like it could be an interesting story, but I just found it really boring. Because I'm the kind of person who needs to finish books, I kind of slogged through it, but I would have rather have not done it. If it was the first book in a series, I would not have. I think I'd have DNF'd it because it was that boring. But it's the final book and I wanted to complete it. But I think it was a very disappointing end to the overall series. So like I said, Graceling I love. Fire is the second book. It is okay, and then Bitter Blue is the worst for me in the trilogy. Next we have the Legend trilogy. I read all 3 of them in 2019. I had originally read the first book, I think in 2013 or 2014. Whenever they first came out, I read it because it sounded amazing. When I initially read it, I'm pretty sure I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Now obviously time has passed. I've grown up, I've read more books, I've read different kinds of books to give me a new kind of opinion. And so I was really into the dystopian books back then. But I think, looking back, I think a lot of them we can say with confidence some of them weren't that good. And I think this one kind of falls into that category, I'm afraid to say. I think the issue was, looking back, I perhaps shouldn't have picked it up again. I enjoyed it in my mind then, and I should have left well alone. But I think because it was an unfinished series, I kind of wanted to just get to it and get it completed. So I reread the first book in order to complete the rest of the series. The issue is that because this was written during that sort of YA time where, you know, the 2012, 2013 era, where you had, especially in the dystopian books, where you had this young teen who had to save everybody. It was a lot of suspension of belief or disbelief when I read this book, because these kids were meant to be really like top of their class, amazing at everything. But it's just very hard to believe that these kind of kids can do that. At 15, I was probably quite useless. I'm sure there are amazing 15-year-olds out there, but not ones that are doing espionage level kind of things. And I also think that the romance as well wasn't all that believable. So because it was very insta-lovey, having them pine over each other, and it was all very, rather surly, especially in the later books, it just became rather frustrating and a bit boring because it was something I wasn't particularly rooting for. Now, when I was kind of putting this list together, I came to realise that there is also a fourth book in the series. I feel like this is quite a new thing, like it came out this year, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't out when I had finished the whole series. The annoying thing is I do want to read it because it takes place, I think, like 10 or so years after the events of the final book. And like I've mentioned before, I just have a need to finish a series. I hate leaving things hanging in the air. Now, as time has passed, perhaps this last book might be better than the trilogy. We'll see how things have progressed over time. I might end up loving this last book. Who knows? We'll find out, but I will read it in 2020 because I've got to now, but my hopes are quite low. Next we have A Court of Frost and Starlight. I believe this came out last year or the year before. I don't really remember. All I know is that people really did not like it. It was very polarized, but for the most part, from what I saw, people really didn't like it. I went into this book kind of knowing that information, but I still really did not enjoy this book. It was actually one of the few 1-star ratings that I gave out because it was just such a nothing book. Now, I know that it's a novella. I know that novellas don't really tend to have a whole lot of substance in them, but it was just people shopping, and I know that it seemed to be nudging towards, you know, the next few books that are coming out, because I think the whole series is going to be, I think, I want to say 6 books or 8 books, who knows. But it was a lot of alluding to the fact that we're going to get some Nesta and we're going to get some, what's his face, Cassian, I think, in the next book, which is great. Hopefully Nesta lightens up a bit because she's a very odious character. But it was just, like I said, very much a nothing book. I know novellas can be done well, so I don't really want to have the excuse of, well, it's just a novella, it's like a book to bridge the gap, whatever it might be, which is fine. But considering that the events of the previous book were so big, I think there could have been a teensy bit more substance to this book. Next one, I am quite disappointed that I didn't enjoy it more. That would be Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. Mainly because it was noted as being sort of Mulan but with fashion elements to it. We have our main character Maya, who has dreams of being a tailor. In this mythical land that they live in, it's mainly men who can gain notoriety and sort of build a career out of being a tailor. Now, her father is the tailor of the family. He's tried to teach the trade to his kids, but Maya is the only one who's really taken an interest into it. So 3 of her brothers go off to war, only 1 comes back and he is injured. So that's how the book starts. And so her father then gets called to, the war ends, her father gets called to the royal palace because as a show of austerity, they want to hold a sewing contest. Obviously, because her father has been a drunk this whole time and Maya has been the one who's been doing all the sewing, she's like, Dad can't go and my brother can't go, so it's got to be me. My biggest issue with this book was the pacing, because we only really get like the first third of the book really dedicated to the fashion stuffs in the book, which is not really a huge problem, but I really do wish that it did go in a somewhat different direction, because towards the end it later sort of became more of like an adventure, finding things, picking up mythical objects kind of book. And so it kind of took a turn away from what I was hoping to be quite a big backbone of the book, which would be the fashion elements of it. It kind of led away from that, which is not an issue, but because there were so many different things going on in the book, we went to so many different places. But I don't really feel like, for one, the world building was as in-depth as it could have been, and 2, we didn't spend enough time in certain places. So I felt like the stakes didn't feel too high in the book. It didn't feel believable. So it just kind of felt like I was going through the motions and just waiting for the end of the book. Which is a shame because I do think the world has so much potential to be built up. It's, I think it's Chinese inspired, the world that it's set in. And I think just going off that alone, there's so much that can be done with it. Because we do often get stories that are set in quite a European sort of fantasy world. And to get a world that we don't usually read about, or, you know, we don't usually get transported to, it would have been nice to have a bit more building done in there. And I don't really mind if we take up time to do more world building. Now, I believe it might be a duology, so that might be the reason for, you know, sort of the book feeling quite rushed. But in that case, I wouldn't even mind if it was a bit of a thicker book, just to get more of a fleshing out of the characters, the relationships, and also the world. But alas, it for me felt quite rushed, so it was very much so a disappointing read. Now, again, I do like to finish things, so I will be reading the second book because also the covers are absolutely beautiful. So it was mainly a cover read for me, if I'm going to be very, very honest. But I will definitely be picking up just to kind of see if there is improvement in the second book compared to the first book and see how it goes. I've read a lot of romance books this year. I read a lot of Tessa Dare books this year. And this one has to be my least favourite. It's When a Scot Ties the Knot. And I believe this is part of the Castle Ever After series from Tessa Dare. The reason why I have such a big beef with this book is because, now, I like to really enjoy the romances, but the romance started under duress. It started with manipulation and blackmail, which I don't really feel like is the best way to start off any sort of relationship. So essentially with these books, each lady gets bequeathed a castle. I think there are 4 books in the series. And so you follow these girls as they live their lives with their new castles that they've been bequeathed. So with this one, I can't remember the main character's name, but she has been lying to her family her whole life because she hasn't married yet. They've been trying to push her to get married. So in order to deflect from her family, she's told them that she has a Scottish sweetheart. And for some very strange reason, she actually writes letters to this sweetheart, I guess to keep up the ruse that she has a loved one out there somewhere, but he's off in the war fighting. So she actually does post these letters, and they end up with somebody who has the exact same name as the person she's made up. So he rocks up at her door one day and says, "Yo, we've got to get married, otherwise I will tell your family." So yeah, not really the best way to start off a romance, because essentially she falls in love with this person who really started off with manipulating her. I didn't really think it was cute. It wasn't really something I particularly enjoyed. They did get together. Obviously, it's a romance book. That's not a spoiler at all. But I wasn't really feeling or enjoying the romance. Like, I didn't really feel like I could fully enjoy the romance just because it was just such a grimy start to the love story. And lastly, we have A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J Maas, which is the final book in the ACOTAR series. This book is basically a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So we have Feyre, who in the beginning of the book, she kills a fae who is guised as, I think, a wolf. And as retribution, his High Lord comes from his world to collect Feyre and take her to the Summer Court, I think he's from. I can't remember now. As retribution for what she's done. And so he is under a curse. He needs Feyre to break the curse because obviously Beauty and the Beast. Sarah J Maas's books are well known throughout Bookland. And they do produce quite polarizing opinions. The issues that people note, I am well aware of those. Those aren't things that I also enjoy. It's taken me a while to come around to accepting the fact that I do like Sarah J Maas's books, but I do think you can, surprise, surprise, be critical of things you do like. That's not my main issue. My issue is that she doesn't really know how to write endings, because a lot of the time, especially with her, this and also her other series, which the name is currently escaping me right now, which is very annoying, but the build-up is never that satisfying. There's always a big bad that needs to be defeated in the series, but there's always some sort of deus ex machina. Because we're told so-and-so is super powerful, this person is super powerful, they're the best in this land, they have the most power ever that's ever been in existence. But there's always something else that comes to save the day, or it kind of seems like it fizzles out. and so it's just left with deflation and frustration because there's the footprints there and the roadworks have been done to create a really amazing ending, but it just never quite gets there with her endings for me. And so this was such a disappointment to me. Now I know that this is not the final book in the series. I don't know if that's why the ending was so lackluster. And it's going to be interesting to see what she does going forward with the next few books in the series, considering that the books were so much centered around this particular threat that we had. So I don't really know what other threat, is going to take place in the other books. It'll be interesting to see. But yeah, that's my main gripe. It's the endings, and I want to see them get better. So in the next half of this series, I really want to get more of a satisfying ending. I may cancel out this as the ending, considering that we're going to get another load of books. But as it stands, if it's just the first 3 books in this series, not here for this ending. Those were my worst reads of 2019. I don't think there was any that I absolutely... Nope. There was that one book from Tessa Dare. But other than that, I don't think there was anything that I really, really hated with a passion. I, for the most part, like I said, had quite a lackluster reading year. So fingers crossed that 2020 is going to be a lot better. Now, if you enjoyed that video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to see more content from myself. But that is all. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.